Welcome to Risk Engineers Talk Governance. This is the second of two episodes where due diligence engineers Richard Robinson and Gaye discuss how information sharing has changed, with part two's discussion on the public sphere. We hope you enjoy the chat. If you do, please support our work by giving us a rating and subscribing on your favourite podcast platform. If you'd like more information on R2A, our newsletter and resources, or have any feedback or topic ideas, please head to the website r2a.com.au.
Hi Richard, welcome to our podcast session today.
Okay, this is part two, I believe.
It is part two of our overall, internet risk podcast that we're talking about. So today we're going to follow on from what we did last time about SFAIRP internet managing internet risk, and talk today about the public sphere and how information sharing has changed over time. And I think you're to give us a brief history and then...
Well, not so much I'm going to give a brief history. I was just going to summarise this. There was a fellow called Jürgen Habermas who died a couple of weeks ago, as a German philosopher. And he was particularly concerned about the public sphere. But basically, he was as a young bloke, he was in Nazi Germany and basically got conscripted at 16 to go and man an aircraft gun in 1945. But it wasn't until after that he actually had to look at the Holocaust sites and just realised what the total horror was. And he became a very influential, I guess, left-wing, basically trying to make sure that German society didn't go to that place again. So, he's sort of well regarded. Now, the concept he had was the public sphere. And what he was pointing out, and maybe I just might read a couple of bits here, he was talking about the public sphere and the role the public sphere has in shaping democratic administration society. In ideal form, the public sphere is made up of private people gathered together as a public and articulating needs of society with the state. And basically saying it's very much a sort of bourgeois, middle-class driven thing. And he said it basically sort of arrived in a practical sense when the coffee shops in the 18th century, where everybody got together and basically gabfest about the key issues of the age, but basically because they were the middle class and they had the voting power, they were the people who basically decided and then sort of set the theme and what politicians would or couldn't do, and basically therefore established what should be the case. Now, the reason why this is kind of interesting, because he then went on to say, well, look, what happened might have started as a coffee shop arrangement, and after a while, all the broadsheets and things that people were printing off to enhance discussion basically turned into newspapers, and that turned into a sort of capitalist-driven market forces sort of thing, where in the end the editor could actually decide who got elected and who didn't, depending on what editorials were written and things like that. But it emphasised that the whole process, the public sphere, emphasised that the newspaper should preferably be independent and giving different points of view, so that the larger society could decide what it is they wanted to do and how they wanted to achieve it. Now, obviously, what happened is the internet, COVID turned up and kind of busted this, because nobody's reading newspapers anymore.
True.
And all the podcasts have sort of waxed powerfully. But we've sort of noticed, partly because the fact that our podcast has become more influential, which to say is a complete source of astonishment to both of us, is an understatement.
That's kind of influential. More popular?
More popular. But what I'd observed was, you see, what's actually been happening, and you see a whole lot of podcasters turned up, some who had more intellectual horsepower than others.
Yeah.
But some of those who had less intellectual horsepower, actually they're fading because they're losing their clicks and all this. I don't know if it's because the algorithm changed or because they're really the thing is just sorting itself out. But the ones who are sort of sustaining, or at least the ones I obviously listen to, are actually fairly high horsepower from what I can tell. Now, I didn't actually realise until I mentioned this Patrick Boyle character. And he turned out to be a number of a professor and a former hedge fund manager, a bunch of different things. He was the one I was telling you about, who sort of was commenting that he speaks perfect English because he's Irish, and everybody else has a strange accent.
Only an Irishman could say that, couldn't they?
Only an Irishman could say that. But the points you were making were actually quite profound, I thought. And then he was going on about the impact of the, because he was a hedge fund, he was looking at the impact of the war. I mean, one of the other points he made in passing was, the oil shortages are going to affect the Scottish pretty severely, because as a population they've evolved to live on fried food, deep fried food, which I thought was a bit tough.
Very tough, very tough.
But he's obviously a very sharp cookie. Now, what I've observed is that the internet ones that seem to be surviving are the people who are actually it's not so much individual presenters. You know, you listen to an individual presenter and I find you get sick of it pretty fast.
Right.
What you want are the people who are actually talking together that you sort of get familiar to.
Discussion.
Discussion. And I actually suspect that's what, because I don't know what you're going to say next any more than you know what I'm going to say next.
That is very true, Richard.
But then you listen to people on international politics from Australian vernacular. You see Hugh White talking with Sam Rogers, I don't know how you pronounce it, Rogeven from the Lowy Institute. And when those two are talking about this politics and the way, you know, American politics affecting Australia and, you know, would you really think that America would come to Australia's defence, and in the changing world, what does Australia have to do? And yes, we've gone and signed free trade agreements last week with the European Union as well as Canada, because Carney was out here. Both the European President and Carney have addressed the Australian Parliament in the last month or so. The whole thing, the world is really changing fast. And these authoritative podcasters, they're actually having discussions, are the ones that seem to be winning the day.
So do you think that comes back to what we're talking about, the public sphere and how information is shared? So
Well,
it's
it's
that discussion.
Yeah, and it's moving away from, because remember, it started in the coffee houses, according to Jurgensen, and it's moved to the newspapers, commercially driven, you know, run by media moguls, Murdoch and the other families and things like that.
They're only printing
And
what
that-
they think people want to hear.
Yeah, but more than that, they tried to then take over the blog sphere and the YouTube sphere, the podcast sphere. But I think people are actually starting to move away from that. And certainly people like me, I don't listen to some particular. I'm listening to. Let's find somebody who knows what they're talking about and listen to them in discussion. And I find that to be a lot more useful. Now, I may be an optimist here, but if you actually think that's the way the world is going, where that discussion used to be. I mean, you want to read an editorial in the newspaper. I can remember hopping on a train and buying the newspaper at the station and reading it on the train. That's what I used to do. I used to come and talk to you about it.
You did.
And I can't do that anymore. And I'd sometimes swap between papers because I wanted different points of view, or I knew different journos had different attitudes. And in fact, what I was doing is reading a discussion, but it's slow because it's in paper and word.
Yeah, right.
Now, when you listen to these guys,
It's 5 or 10 minutes.
It's 5 or 10 minutes, and they're talking about real-time events far faster than these newspaper people can keep up with it. Now, I'm not saying that you wouldn't still want to read something like The Atlantic or The Economist or something like that, because they've actually got people writing something who seriously think about it. But they're not the people sitting online writing it. They're the people get the ideas, put an article together, and then publish it. So I think the world's changed. That's certainly the case. And you're fretting about your kids, because at the moment they're just taking information from anywhere, and all information's equal if it comes from the internet, right?
Correct. They don't know how to disseminate
They
between
don't
it.
distinguish between it. But I can remember quite distinctly thinking as a student many years ago that if I had the choice between reading Plato or listening to Plato live, I would have listened to Plato live. But you couldn't do it.
You were a different type of person growing up, Richard. I think we can all agree with that. But if we bring it back to the stuff that we do in that SFAIRP realm and that moral imperative, are we saying that that's trying to create this public vision and a societal vision rather than individuals just doing their own thing and...
Well, that's correct. I
thinking
mean,
in
if you're talking about the
silos.
public sphere where you're all gab-fested in a coffee shop,
Yeah.
and they're mostly blokes doing it anyway,
Yeah.
to media moguls running the show, which I got a funny feeling a lot of us didn't think was the particularly best option that we could have, to competent
people having discussions.
real-time discussions,
Yeah.
and it's discussions. I mean, you listen to this, you know, the different people, and you do see them popping up now, is that the people who actually make sense are getting interviewed by other people's blogs. You know, I observe that, you know, Hugh
As
White gets
guest
interviews,
speakers.
he gets interviewed by different people.
Yeah.
And you notice that fellow I was talking about, Patrick Boyle, I've noticed him getting interviewed because obviously he knows what he's talking about. So if you're a serious podcaster, the only people you want to talk to are people who actually have competent views, and you can have a competent discussion.
Yeah.
And you can actually have a disagreement, but it's a disagreement that's actually intellectually thought through. So if you're talking about having a good resolution to complicated issues, you've got the best chance I think you can in real time faster with the new internet system. And, you know, you can have an argument. I mean, one of the problems with, you know, we had the problem with people, the American president just keeps typing away things every night, and you've got no idea what's going on and all sorts of things. But then you hear a competent discussion about this, that, and what's going on, and all of a sudden you can make sense of it, which otherwise you couldn't do. Now, whether that's helpful or not, I don't know, but the optimist in me is saying, yeah, maybe it's not as bad as everybody thinks, and maybe it's not as bad for your kids as everybody thinks, because if they become clear which ones are the ones worth listening to, that do encourage the public sphere,
where you get the best
competent information
yes,
from,
to make informed decisions, which
to make
is
competent, informed decisions, which is what you want. You want democracy fails if you don't have the competence, middle class, as it were, having this informed decision making. And
I think we've talked a podcast about informed decision making, and that's the basis of SFAIRP, isn't it?
In effect, yes.
Yeah.
And that you've thought through all the options and the circumstances. I mean, that was when we invited the professor in law and public policy from Cambridge out, David Howarth. He's saying the lawyers and the engineers are very much aligned. You've got a problem, or you want to do something. What are the options and the circumstances? Which is the best way forward?
Yeah.
Isn't that what an election is?
Supposed to be, yes.
Supposed to be.
Supposed to be. So, Richard, in that podcast, there was a lot of information that my little brain's been ticking over, and my summary of it is that you think R2A have really moved into that thought leadership process now, again, of the due diligence space and the WHS legislation in a SFAIRP sense.
Yep.
And that SFAIRP is really encouraging that moral imperative to look at the community as a whole and do the best for the community in a sort of a public sense, rather than looking at it from a commercial and individual silo sense.
That's right. SFAIRP has moved into the public sphere, and it's taking people like us to actually discuss it, and so that everyone understands
what it is, because it's complex.
Well, it's any moral imperative tends to create difficulties for society.
Yeah. And so you need to have these robust discussions to be able to go forward and get those best outcomes that we're hoping to get.
Well, you know how long it took us to move from the sort of target level of risk and safety to the SFAIRP side of things.
Yes.
And it took us the best part of 20 years.
Yeah.
Now, that transition, we're in the business. We live and breathe this stuff. So if it was hard for us, just imagine how
hard it is.
Ordinary people just going with their ordinary lives.
Yeah.
It is to get up to speed in these things.
Yeah.
It's very difficult.
So I think keeping those two things in mind, look at all the things that you can do and what's reasonable in the circumstances, but with that holistic community and public context, you hopefully get the best outcomes. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Gaye.